Hi everybody, I'm Les Lim. This is Latest Paradigms in Content Editing. It's a lot of words, but it's really not that big of a deal, trust me. So I'm Les Lim, it's nice to meet you. I am from Minneapolis. I've been a Drupal developer for about 12 years now. Minneapolis is a wonderful place. It's home of Twin Cities Drupal Camp, which is the greatest Drupal camp north of DrupalCorn. I hope we see you all in Minneapolis next year for DrupalCon 2020. It's going to be in May. It's going to be a great time. Minneapolis is a lovely city, and you all should move there. I work at a company called 10.7 in Minneapolis. 10.7 is a small digital web agency. We specialize pretty much in Drupal. We're full service though. We'll do everything from project management to ideation to development to support post-launch. We also do Drupal hosting and operational support in case you are interested in getting your own clusters of containers set up. You might have been here for our training that we did on Wednesday on Kubernetes and hosting your own Kubernetes cluster on DigitalOcean. So if you're interested in those kind of things, if you missed out on the training, reach out and give us a ring or whatever the email equivalent of a ring is at hello@10.7.com. So we're here because producing content is already hard enough. Who here is responsible for getting me on the internet? Who here is responsible for, in at least some portion, in getting content created, in actually writing the content and getting it on the site? Yeah, a few hands, actually plenty of hands here. So I'm going to go out on a limb and wager that you are not as appreciated as you probably should be. The writing and the actual ideation, the thinking about what the content should be is already difficult. And as somebody who is a lapsed English major, I know that it takes me about 3 hours to put like a single word to the paper. I stress on word choice and voicing and all of the things that aren't obvious to the people who are just creating the tools for you to do what you do. You have a hard enough job. Putting the things that you create on the site shouldn't be. There are a few goals that I think that so first of all, I should preface this by saying that this talk is more centered around the people whose responsibility it is to create the tools for the people who are putting the content online. And to that end, I think that it's useful for us to establish what we should be striving for in creating those tools. I think that when we're creating editor interfaces, really, no standing right. Okay, I don't think I need the internet for this, but we'll find out. I think that there are 4 major goals that we are looking for in creating a great editor experience. And that's to make content entry more powerful. We want you to be able to do incredible things. We want it to be more pleasant. We want the experience of putting content on the website to be a joy, or at least not hell on earth. We want it to be predictable insofar as when we're on the editing interface, we're reasonably sure that the things that we are putting into the editing interface will look the way that we expect it to look for the anonymous user or the end user who is coming to the site. And lastly, this is a goal more for the people who are maintaining the site on the other end, but we want the content that gets created to be structured. We want there to be things that the developer can react to make sure that it looks good on mobile devices, desktop devices, watches, whatever devices happen to be relevant to you. We want it to be structured so that it's easy to be migrated or to be portable, and it's easier for content management systems to know what to do with that content. I really wanted that to be another P word, and I just couldn't come up with one. So if you have one for me, come talk to me afterwards. What's that?
Could be a silent P.
A silent. We'll try that later on. I feel like that might end up with more confusion than anything else, but I'm willing to try it out. Structured. So based on that, we don't have a great deal of time, and honestly, I'd love to be able to end a little early so we can turn this into a little bit more of a discussion, because you all have experiences that I don't, and I'd love to hear more about them. But I want to talk about 4 main sort of editing paradigms, or just models of putting content on the site, starting with, and this wasn't in the title, but I really wanted to just make sure that we talk about the regular old field interface that we all sort of grew up with in CMSs before the latest component-based revolution. I just want to talk about the conventional field interface, and then go down the list of paragraphs, layout builder, and Gutenberg, which I chose somewhat arbitrarily just because those are the things that I'm the most familiar with, but I think these are also things that have the most penetration amongst Drupal sites. And then there's Gutenberg, which is just weird, and we'll talk about that later. So for the basic field interface, what I'm talking about here is, and I think that page-based design is, I'm not sure if that's a term that's in relevant usage. I was really looking for the opposite of component-based design. But page-based design is essentially the template that you have is the full page. And you are able to manipulate that page only insofar as you're able to manipulate the various fields that are preset for you in that template. So a hallmark of a basic field interface is that there's a generic body field that's usually some sort of a WYSIWYG. There may be other fields that are defined for very specific purposes, but those other fields get statically placed on the page. You don't have the ability to manipulate where those fields go. That's defined for you at the page level in the template. So like we're looking at something like on the umami demonstration that you've probably seen a lot of. So on the left side we have the edit interface. We've got 4 fields, and on the right side we see what the user sees, the end user, and these translate pretty much one-to-one, and there's no editor ability to rearrange how any of these fields are arrayed on the page. So this is fairly standard. This is Drupal 5, 6, and 7 before paragraphs. This is most CMS content management systems. So applying our 4 goals to it, what can we tell about it? It's powerful in not very many ways. It allows you to basically put in the content that the person who created the template intended for you to put in. On the plus side, though, it's a very pleasant user experience. Not having very many options means that it's very easy for you to know exactly what you should be putting in and what you are not allowed to do, which is, in some ways, a comfort. It's very predictable. The things you are entering in are always going to be placed in exactly the same place in the template every single time, and there is comfort in that predictability. It's also structured. Each of those fields has, the developer can define the ways that they are put on the page, the classes that are assigned to them, the ways that they are wrapped in elements, and we can flex that however it needs to go for mobile devices, for screens. It's very migratable because everything is in named fields. It works out very well. However, there are asterisks, right? The asterisk for the basic field interface is that it works that way within the limitations. And I think where you get into problems is with the ability for you to hijack the body field for nefarious purposes. So this is an extreme example, and I think that most content management systems these days won't even allow you to do this. But the thing is, your content editors are going to ask you for it. They're going to want to be able to insert random bits of snippets into the page. They're going to be wanting to put images interspersed between pieces of content items, and you're going to want to be able to give that kind of tool to them because it's what they need to be able to flex the full range of their creative muscle. And the body field, as traditionally conceived, just isn't up to the task. The more you compromise what it is that the body field is meant to do in order to give them those options, the less likely that you're going to have a pleasant experience, a predictable experience, or a structured experience. But within those limitations, this is still a very viable model. You should not be thinking of this as being obsolete simply because it is old. It is very useful. But we're here to talk about giving you a little bit more muscle. And so in recent years, the component-based content design sort of framework has really exploded. And I think that in some ways Drupal is a lot behind this. At, I believe, DrupalCorn Portland, I think it was, Karen McGrain, one of the keynote speakers, had a talk about, essentially about thinking of content as not a blob of items that are amorphous on the page, but as chunks of structured content. And I think that started off a lot of the conversations we had about component-based content design, in which instead of specific named fields, like field image or field tags, we replace those, so the specific fields, with generic component types that are reusable, that are interchangeable, that are intermixable. So to illustrate what that kind of means, on the left side we might have a traditional field-based layout. We have a static node title, an image field that is always stuck to the top of the page. And we have a body field that can contain who knows what inside the body field. But that's the general outline of what the template might look like, and that's immutable. On the right side, we have what a component-based design might afford you, the ability to take a text components or multiple text components and arrange them on the page in relation to other components of various types to be able to create a tableau of content, something that's more interesting than just the linear set. I always have the image at the top of the page. I always have a piece of body or a river of text below it. And the right side, that is the kind of flexibility that we want to afford our content editors within reason, and that's the model of component-based design. So for that, I think we're going to start and look at the first of those three examples that are in the title of this talk, which is paragraphs. Quick show of hands. Familiarity with paragraphs, generally? Okay, great. This is recorded. I just want to go through it quickly, and that this is going to be a review for a lot of people. But components, using the paragraph model, components are Drupal entities. And instead of having that body field, we replace that body field with a paragraphs field that allows us to construct the body or conceive of the body as a collection of individual paragraphs. Let's see here. So I'm going to try a live demo now, and we'll see if I can do that without the internet. So I just want to go to my installation of our Umami demo, and I'm going to add a piece of content called a paragraphs article. It's a content type I created to illustrate paragraphs as opposed to the traditional field-based design. So I've left some of the fields in there because I think that even with paragraphs, some named structured fields are still useful. So for the title, this is my DrupalCorn paragraphs example. And then the tags field is, we didn't touch this. This still is a structured bit of content that still works independently of the body. So we'll add DrupalCorn and, oh, you know what? I didn't make this an autocomplete field, so we won't add tags. It doesn't end up mattering for the purpose of this demonstration. What I wanted to show mostly is that instead of there being a body field, what I have instead is this drop-down that says add something to paragraphs. It tells me I have no paragraphs added yet, but I essentially can pick between any of these predefined paragraph types or component types to start to construct individual pieces of my body. So I might start with a piece of text. And that gives me a component that just has a traditional WYSIWYG field. And I'll generate some lorem ipsum to paste in here. And that's a good start. I've got a bit of text. But I don't have to stop there. I can add a banner, for example. And so, you know, I should have come prepared with actual URLs to put in here. But a banner component might give me a bit of text I can overlay on top of an image. So I can say, hi, DrupalCorn. Link it to drupalcorn.org and Drupal goodness. And then a banner image, let's see, that's not going to be a very great image, but tiles. I'm a board gamer. This is an image from a board game I like a lot. We can talk about that afterwards as well if you're interested. So let's save that to the page. I've created a piece of content that has exactly two components to it. It's got a text component, and then it's got a banner component that has a bit of text overlaid on top of it. That banner component is below the text, but I can very easily go back to my edit interface and grab that component and change the order of it to what I please. So I can save that, and instantly we see already that this is more robust and gives us more options than just the WYSIWYG field. Whereas before, I wouldn't necessarily have any way to put a structured piece of content, such as like a banner, in the middle of a WYSIWYG. Now I have the ability to intersperse this with other components. I can put a banner in between two different paragraphs of text if I wanted to. I'm not limited to just this single text component. I can add as many text components as I like to the page, and then the concept of my body becomes not just a single monolith of words and images and other things. It's pieces of content that comprise a whole. So I'll add that. This will go up the top here. While we're here, I'll add a video component, which is, I'll just randomly pick one of my pre-created pieces of media videos. I like beats. We'll do that. And without the internet, that's going to fail. That's one thing that we found out. And I wonder if maybe it's worth trying to connect to the internet just so that examples like this are okay. But still, the concept is still pretty much the same. I'm able to construct my news, my article, in linearly and mix and match different component types. With paragraphs, I have the option. I'm not limited to just those 3 content types. I can go into my editing interface, my paragraph interface, and create new paragraphs, new types of paragraphs. And it's an entity. It uses the Drupal entity system. So the creation of new paragraph types is going to be familiar to anybody who's a Drupal builder. The site building experience building a paragraph types is you'll be adding fields to an interface that's just like adding nodes. You'll be theming those paragraph types in the same way that you would theme any entity type, any node type in the system. So if you're already a Drupal themer, if you're familiar with the Drupalisms for working with entities and for theming entities, you already know how to work with paragraphs, which is extremely flexible. It's very nice to be able to apply concepts that you already know and apply them to tools that make your work just a little bit more robust. Paragraphs are collections of individual paragraphs. Paragraphs, it turns out, can contain other paragraphs, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So this is something that people do a lot. You see a lot of people using paragraphs like this, and I feel like I have some ownership of that. So a couple years back, David Needham from Pantheon and I did a talk together at DrupalCon New Orleans on paragraphs, where we pretty heavily endorsed the idea that you can have paragraphs that are meant for layout, inside of which you put paragraphs that are meant for content. We're going to do this. We have an example of this already on our demo site, and it's called a multi-item row. So let's go back to our DrupalCorn paragraphs example. We'll edit this, and I'm going to add in a multi-item row paragraph type. The multi-item row paragraph type contains, in and of itself, a paragraphs field, so that I can now, in my multi-item row, add, and I've only made videos available to this multi-item row, so I can add how to grow herbs and cooking sugar snap peas and beets. Again, really love beets. To my multi-item row. And these are nested paragraphs. These are actually paragraph entities now that will be rendered inside of this multi-item row paragraph. We'll see what that looks like here. And it'll look like a lot of secure connection fails. But that still illustrates the idea. I'm able to use the multi-item row paragraph type to define a kind of layout. It gives me 3 or n number of side-by-side nested paragraphs that instead of going on top of each other the way that our previous paragraphs have gone, because they are contained inside a paragraph that has styles on it that define these as being horizontally placed. I have some control over a 2-dimensional design instead of just a single-dimensional design. This works fine. People are doing this successfully in production sites right now. And so I wouldn't besmirch this as a paradigm for use. I think there are problems with it. One is that if I go back to my interface here and edit my multi-item row, this is already a bit of a beast of a user interface. It happens that this nested paragraphs edit form is really, really simple, but you can very easily get into a situation where these nested paragraphs have 4 or 5 or 6 different things that you have to fill out for each one. And then what we're working with is a pretty large subform on top of another pretty large subform that's contained inside a component subform that all lives on your edit interface. That is very hard to get your head around, but even if you know exactly what's happening, it's still just very easy to get lost on the page. The bigger this goes, I just don't have enough context of what I'm seeing on the page to even know how far down the page I am. I don't know which component compared to other components we're looking at. This very, very quickly becomes confusing for any reasonably complex page. In addition to the fact that I think the user interface itself gets really, really complex, these nested paragraphs are constrained by the container paragraph that you put them into. I can rearrange these within its own container paragraph, but I can't pull them out. Like, you'll notice that I had added beats before to this node, but I added it as a primary paragraph at the top level. I can't take this paragraph and drag it inside my multi-item row, and I would like to, because this is duplicative with the paragraph I put down here. That's not possible. I can only manipulate this paragraph up and down amongst its siblings. And the difficulty I'm having here right now is another illustration of that. The bigger these items get, the harder it is just to even drag things up and down the form. So I think that's a constraint. I think it's entirely reasonable for a content editor to want to say, I have 2 multi-item rows next to each other because I want to create a 3x2 grid. And I just want to be able to move one video from the top row of that grid to the bottom row of that grid. And they can't do that because it's in 2 separate nested paragraph contexts. They would have to remove this video, confirm the removal of that paragraph, go down to their second multi-item row paragraph, create the video paragraph inside that nested paragraph instead, and all I wanted to do was move it. Like, the idea that I couldn't just do that isn't clearly obvious to a content editor who doesn't necessarily, who doesn't care about those constraints. They just know that they wanted a 3x2 grid, and you didn't give that to them. You gave them 2 separate rows that happen to work that way. So I think there are limitations, and then it gets worse if you ever think about the possibility that you can keep on nesting paragraphs to infinity and beyond. You can incept yourself, and that's a problem. So so I'm not necessarily endorsing the idea that paragraphs should contain other paragraphs. Paragraphs are extremely powerful. They're flexible. They're extendable, and they use concepts that you probably already know from Drupal, which is powerful. It's mostly pleasant, but again, like once you get down into certain levels of nesting, you can seriously hamper how pleasant of an experience that happens to be. It's mostly predictable insofar as the components that you are creating should behave the same as that component behaves anywhere else in the system. Although that interface that we saw wasn't necessarily very indicative of the content that you would get. You're still relying on Drupal's preview system or on being able to save the node and actually look at it to know exactly what it is that you're looking at. But that's not very different than traditional field interfaces or the traditional Drupal interface. It is extremely well structured because each individual paragraph has the structures, the HTML structures, the classes that have been defined on it by your development staff, and that's not for nothing. That's very useful. It's also very structured in the back end of the database. It uses Drupal's normal field an entity storage system, and so if you understand the way that the database storage goes, you'll quickly understand the way that the paragraph storage goes as well. That asterisk, I happen to think that paragraphs are best suited for one-dimensional use, and this is an opinion that I've sort of come to over time. I just don't necessarily believe that nesting paragraphs leads to good user experiences, just because they don't follow the expectations that I think a lot of content editors would have about how components should work. I think there's absolutely great use cases for paragraphs thought of as linear constructions of paragraphs down the line of a body. But I think that once you start to add in the need to put in a second dimension of manipulation, moving things horizontally in an area, or moving things to a more complex layout, paragraph starts to break down a little bit, and we need some other answer. That other answer, the Drupal community came together and they came up with Layout Builder as that idea. Layout Builder is components now, but as Drupal fields and or blocks. They are taking concepts that already exist within Drupal and making them into, reusing them, but in an interface that allows them to be manipulated inside of a layout. Well, we'll see what that means in a second. Quick show of hands here. Who's had experience with Layout Builder either as an editor or a developer? A couple people? Far fewer than paragraphs. Okay, so this is going to be interesting. I think that Layout Builder is that interface for manipulating content in 2 dimensions, but it's got its own caveats as well. Just getting ahead of myself. Let's go and take a look at an example here. So we'll create a piece of content we've set up for this purpose called a Layout Builder article. And from the edit interface, it looks very much like a traditional user interface. We'll say, my DrupalCorn layout builder example. We'll skip tags, and we'll add some more lorem ipsum here. Let's add an image as well. Let's add the same image. I'll add a video too. Let's put beats back on the page. It's not funny. It's a little funny. So, out of the box, not much has changed. I still have my image in a particular portion of the page. I have the video I tried to embed in a particular spot on the page, and my body text. And the only thing here that makes this different from the conventional field example is that I have this layout tab available to me right now. The layout tab allows me, in the context of just this node, node 26, I can enter an interface where I have the ability to drag and drop each of those individual fields into new sections that I define in my layout. A couple things to note here right off the bat. The layout that I am manipulating is constrained by what the node content would be. I'm not changing the layout of the entire page. We still have the things that the Drupal theme has defined as other regions of the page. So I still have a header here, I have a sidebar that's being defined in the theme, and the layouts that I am able to manipulate here are really just what would normally have been the space reserved for the main body content of the page. Within those constraints, I have a significant amount of flexibility as to what I can do here. I can add a section of a layout, which allows me to say I want a 2-column section of my layout that I am adding to the page. I want them to be equal widths. Now I've got a 2-column section into which I can add or place blocks of content on the page. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to drag my body up in here. You know what? I'll drag it over to the right. I want my image flush left, and I want my video flush left as well. The tags I want to display below my body content, and I don't think I have any links field items, but let's just leave them here at the very bottom of in this original section, in this one-off 100% width section. So now we can save the layout. And now my page is reorganized according to the constraints, how I've pulled things into the page. I have a 2-column layout. My items are flowing to the left side. The layouts are the pre-configured layouts in Drupal are smart enough that they will flow to each other, I believe, at some point at a certain breakpoint. Whoops. Oh, you know what? I am totally wrong about that. They do not do that. But you could do that. You could do that with CSS that you create yourself for them. One other amazing feature about the Layout Builder is instead of the representations of the content on the layout interface, I can get an actual representation of that content by showing a preview of each of those items on the page. So now I can manipulate things exactly how they look for this particular page. I can take this bit of text and move it back down to that original section. I can move my video over to the right. And now I actually have a pretty decent understanding on the editing interface page for the layout itself what my content is going to look like when I save it. I can do that without having to first preview it. This is a huge win for the predictability of your content. You might have noticed that there is this add block interface as well. One of the things that Layout Builder allows you to do is to add arbitrary content into your page layouts here that were not originally a part of the content that you edited on the page. So I could, for example, add a new section here. Let's call it a 3-column example. I want it to be roughly equal widths in my column. So I've created a new section of my layout that has 3 columns side by side. I'm going to add a block. So when I add a block, I get a sidebar interface that tells me the different kinds of things I can add in. I can add in aspects of the node itself, fields or properties that were available on the node. I can add in blocks that were made available to the Drupal block system. I can place them right into my node layout as if they were regular content. But I can also create a custom block that is a block type within Drupal. This is a block type I created using the custom block libraries interfaces in Drupal. I can create a video block right here that's just used for this page. It's an entity that that's not specifically created from the edit interface. I'm just creating this now on the layout as an item for the page. The title I'll give it is Video 1. This is really just to label it on the interface. And I can keep doing that across the way here. So I can create another custom block that's a video block. Video 2, I don't want to display the title. We'll make beats again. And we'll do that for a third. So beats, again. I think I left display title on this one, which is why we're seeing video 1. So I'm going to go back and edit this block using the contextual links interface. We'll configure that block, uncheck display title, and re-update it. And I've now made the equivalent of what we did in paragraphs with our multi-item row right here in the Layout Builder interface. I can save it, take a look at what comes back on the page. And we've got our 3-up of video content. Furthermore, I'm not constrained anymore to just being able to manipulate these videos within its section. I can move this video item up into my 100% section. I can move it elsewhere. I can move it into a different row. I think those images are gone now because I'm not connected to the interface, to the internet. There they come back. But because I can manipulate blocks and move them into any section that I have created, I have a 2-dimensional interface. I'm not constrained to any particular row or column. I can construct my content to my heart's desire, as long as I can think of them as stacked sections of various columns. So that's some of the flexibility that Layout Builder allows. I think there are also a few issues with this interface that I think that might have to be explained away or be made part of training. For one, I am not sure that it's clear what the difference is between the Edit tab and the Layout tab. Since you now have the ability to create components directly from the Layout tab, the usefulness of the Edit tab becomes a little bit suspect. I think that there is going to be instances where your content editors would want to eschew this page entirely and just start creating layouts directly from this interface. And that might be fine. That might be absolutely intentional, and you might want them to do that way by default. But those are decisions that you'll have to make according to how you feel like your editors will receive this interface as opposed to this one. It's entirely possible that you only want the layout to be available to a certain permission or a certain role type, and that's something that's also powerful. Maybe only maybe only your editor-in-chief can change the layout of a node, but you mostly want your editors to just have the traditional field layout. That's absolutely possible. And one of the defining features of being able to have the layout be a separate interface from the edit interface. But those are decisions that you'll have to make. I think that as far as Layout Builder goes, it's obviously very powerful. It has the same sort of ability, the flexibility and extendability that paragraphs have. You can create multiple block types the same way you can create multiple paragraph types. The experience is mostly pleasant. I think that with a little practice, it's pretty clear how to use the Layout Builder, and the ability to just drag and drop things and see exact representations of things on that page is super powerful. It's a joy to work with in a lot of cases. Things I don't necessarily like about it are the sidebar interface here that you get when you add or manipulate blocks. This can seem a little constraining. There are also a lot of options here. There's an ecosystem of modules that plug into Layout Builder that change various aspects of this editing interface that would behoove you to look into. There's Layout Builder restrictions that allow you to take off items from this listing that you know you'll never need to use. There's a module that allows you to take the edit interface and put it in a modal window instead of inside the sidebar here. There are also modules that allow you to add options to the section configuration to change up the various things that you can configure on the section. So in addition to column widths, I might want to be able to put arbitrary classes or styles on a section to be able to change aspects of the way it works, like its background colors or anything else that you might want to do to apply a class to it. This might be a way to add bootstrap classes, for example, to sections. Predictable mostly. Structured, it is extremely well structured, except in one sort of niggling way. The back-end storage for these is really weird. It doesn't use the regular Drupal field system. Instead, all the information about your layout is stuffed together inside a serialized bit of text. And that's very hard to work with from a developer standpoint. That may not be a problem for you at all, but it definitely gave me a little bit of pause when I was trying to figure out what are other ways that I can play with or manipulate or get information about what I put into what layouts. Outside of that, this system is pretty great, and it's absolutely a tool that you should have in your wheelhouse. It has the added benefit of being a DrupalCorn module right now, so the support for it should be robust going forward. That's, where am I? Layout Builder. Oh, that's right. It's a Google document. Huh. Okay, so we need to connect to the Wi-Fi again. That's not the Wi-Fi. That's a VPN. I can see my slides. I just want to turn my slides on. No.
What's on the Open Network login page? The gray bar.
On the gray bar.
Down.
Down?
Above the search?
Yes.
Above the search. Oh. Thank you. Above the search. Okay. And then back to presenting. Thank you. Yay! So a little bit about Gutenberg now. So Gutenberg is something that the WordPress community has come up with. It is also a component-based paradigm where the components are widgets that you build directly in the WYSIWYG. It's very slick, and it's also very jarring to anybody who is used to the way that Drupal edit interfaces look. Jarring, I don't want to say in a bad way or necessarily, but who has experience with Gutenberg? A couple of people?
WordPress.
Yeah, so it's WordPress's default editor as of WordPress 5. There was a lot of acrimony in that community about the rollout of Gutenberg, which we don't have to get into. There was a lot of talk about its accessibility, the accessibility implications of Gutenberg. Gutenberg development since then has been pretty good. They've solved a lot of the accessibility issues that had been plaguing it from launch. I don't want to get into the politics necessarily of what that release went like, but just know that it's an open source project, and some enterprising developers, I think based in Europe, decided that they could make this available to Wordpress or to Drupal as well. So let's take a look at that. We'll go back to our examples here, and I'll create a Gutenberg article. Right off the bat, this is something unlike anything that Drupal has ever seen before. This is a text field in Drupal, but Gutenberg has taken it over to be the majority of my editing interface. On the right side of the screen, I still have representations of the rest of my Drupal form, but they are shunted off to a sidebar. They are less important than the main task of constructing your content, which comprises the majority of this interface. I've still got my title settings here. Every other field in Drupal is going to be put inside this more settings checkbox or field set and be considered out of the way. The idea behind Gutenberg is that it's a super advanced WYSIWYG where I can start typing text. When I hit enter, it creates a new paragraph. But it is intelligent enough to be able to take every new block level element on the page and manipulate that individually. So for example now, if I take 10 paragraphs of lorem ipsum text here and paste them onto the page, Gutenberg is smart enough to be able to break those out into 10 different manipulable elements on the page. Each of those block level elements I can change to something else. So I can convert this to a header element, for example, now, and manipulate this separately. The interfaces for each of those elements are built into the element itself. There's no top level text bar anymore. And this interface is incredibly sophisticated. One thing that is hard to do with a traditional WYSIWYG, for example, is to be able to copy text between multiple blocks and be sure that you're copying exactly what you intend to copy. That's not a problem for Gutenberg. If I am copying across multiple blocks, it automatically assumes, I think correctly, that I want to take the entirety of each block that I'm trying to highlight. So when I cut out these 4 blocks and paste them elsewhere, I don't get weird nested blocks inside, paragraphs inside other paragraphs, or other artifacts of bad copies and pastes. I get exactly what I intended, which is that my blocks just move to a different part of the document. So just the base WYSIWYG experience of this is sort of a joy in and of itself. It doesn't stop there. I have the ability to add blocks other than just my normal typing paragraph header tasks. I can add lists, obviously, so I can add 1, 2, 3 as a different kind of block level elements. I can also add component type elements to my WYSIWYG that are defined by Gutenberg as React widgets. But for example, one thing that comes with Gutenberg out of the box is this cover element. And when I add a cover element, I get a form in line with my editor, where I can upload an image and immediately start typing my overlay text on it. The cover block type in Gutenberg has settings which are available on the right side here. I can say that I can change the font sizes, which, this is for somebody who, this is frankly alarming to me, and one of the things I hate about Gutenberg is that I actually don't want this display at all. I don't want people to manipulate the font size this way. This is frankly too much. But you have the ability to find additional CSS classes. I think there's traditionally a way to also make it fixed to the page. Regardless, if I just save this right now here, I got to give it a title, but my DrupalCorn Gutenberg example, and I've got an overlay on top of it. The interface for building those components is built directly into the WYSIWYG, and it's manipulable the way any other block element is manipulable. So I can drag it anywhere on the page. I can use the up arrow buttons to just move it up and down between blocks, which is really nice when you don't trust your ability to drag and drop, which I often do not. So yeah, I don't want to go through all the different kinds of things that Gutenberg allows you to embed directly into the interface, but they're astounding. Embeds from other sites. There is the ability to add your multi-column widgets directly within Gutenberg as well, so I can do my 3-column this way as well. That's now a multi-column widget where I can add my additional other blocks, so I could add my embeds here. I can add my YouTube embed directly here.
Could you drag that out of that column into the main column, like on paragraphs?
So that's actually a great question. I think you can. Yeah.
There you go. Cool.
And I can drag it back in, right there.
So why do you like this?
So that's a great question. So one of the things that I don't like about it, and I don't even know if I can articulate exactly what I don't like about it. Let's show you the the source code of this field. So I'm going to go to the code editor. And so these are my components, right? In order for Gutenberg to know how to convert those items back into Gutenberg blocks, it has to bound them with HTML comments that describe that component. So every paragraph gets a comment in the source that identifies the Gutenberg type. For cover, it's even worse. So like the settings that governed that cover bit, they're created as a bit of JSON object, and embedded directly into the item here. There's absolutely no way for you to introspect this with like a SQL query or something like that. You are stuck dealing with this as a monolith again. It's the value of your body field, and that's your relationship to this content now. It's in a lot of ways, it's what the WYSIWYG experience wants to be like, but it contains with it all of the same constraints that having one blob in the WYSIWYG would be. I don't think this is quite the blobs and chunks conversation. I think that these are clearly chunks of content. These are clearly componentized, but it's not necessarily componentized in a way that a developer can easily work with.
It's not structured.
It's not structured, exactly. It's structured in a very sort of hostile way, in my opinion.
Trying to push that out, via JSON, just like, in a handle situation, might be an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, it might be. But it might be great because Gutenberg is open source. So like if you migrate it to another system that uses Gutenberg, it might just work out of the box, right? So like who can really, I can't say. I wish somebody would be able to tell me these things because this is still pretty new and I don't know who exactly is using this out in the wild. There's also just like this takes over the user interface, and this is such a great user interface that I'm not sure that's a bad thing. if this were the default user interface for like a traditional field model, and if we just took out the ability to add in these extra components, maybe that's the answer. Maybe all this is just a better way to put in paragraphs, headers, list items, but we still rely on Layout Builder or on paragraphs to be able to do everything else more complicated with things. I don't know. The possibilities are out there, but I would love to hear from other people who are using it, or what other people think the possibilities for combining these would be. One of the things that I would love to be able to talk about here, but I think we're out of time, is I think that there's plenty of room to be mixing and matching all of these different paradigms together. I think there are instances in which you'd want to use the Layout Builder to build landing pages, for example. But in Umami, for recipes, you're going to want to stick to something more like the traditional fields module, because that's a very structured piece of content, and you want that to be predictable across every other recipe. There are instances you might want to use paragraphs for certain kinds of content that are not landing pages, and Layout Builder instead for the items that are landing pages. You might then consider that you want the same kinds of components to be available for your paragraphs content and your Layout Builder content, and figure out how to reuse your paragraph types inside Layout Builder. That's absolutely possible to do. You might consider that Gutenberg is the edit interface that you use for your content, but that you use Layout Builder then to add in other stuff to the page in other regions of the page that are defined by Layout Builder. You basically don't eschew the multi-column aspects of Gutenberg, and you use Layout Builder to add all of your stuff that isn't other content. These are all possible. These modules work together with each other, and it's really what you feel like your content editors are going to be comfortable with, what you are comfortable supporting as an editor yourself or as a developer yourself. And I would love to know more about this, because we've only started to really scratch the surface of the combined nature of these tools ourselves, and we're learning as we go as well. So yeah, I think the future is very bright, but I don't know what it looks like yet. And I'd love to hear if anybody else has any ideas, or if they've explored other things that I don't even know about that weren't here on this list. If you've got ideas, by all means, let's hear more questions about what we talked about. We're probably out of time, but no one's coming after me. Whatever. How are we doing? We good?
There's a camp wrap up at 3:45.
Okay.
I'd like to attend, but I mean, if everyone wants to stick around for listening.
I'm going to hit the red button. I can stick up here for a bit, but yeah, let's go 3:45 and do the camp wrap up. But thanks, everyone. That's the talk.